and Johns Hopkins University announced, soft launched an exploration to do an open source program office which is for university wide, with the idea of how to then see how that might scale and be a model for others. They're in the exploratory phase, but it has been green lighted by the president's office, and so we're moving forward with that. It's very early though.
Right. And I think it's exciting. I think we needed a way to start to engage the cities, and it does seem to be a fairly positive response. But as you point out, very very early on.
Jacob, what are some of the top priority data sets that the city would want to have Hopkins collect and let them work with?
I think it's more, what we're first starting to say is the construct of an open source program office is a flexible structure.
Okay.
Which, if we were to say, where is open source as a community in the smart city arena?
Yeah.
Can we not use the open source program office construct to help build some of this? It's worked successfully for a lot of the larger corporations. There's already a network of program offices on the industry side. So it was saying, can we adopt it? And then let's start that by adopting it at university, and seeing how it might work mainly at university first.
Okay. Thanks.
Ulrich, did you want to say anything about your engagements there? I thought there were a lot of good Fireware discussions, and I certainly enjoyed a number of those engagements. Did you want to add anything from your experience at DC Expo?
Yeah, for me the discussions we had were very good. Also the workshops, and one of our targets is to bring more open source based smart approaches, especially promoting standard API, which is this ETSI NSI LD standard, and trying also to promote, as Wilfried, as you said, the context broker, which in the meantime was selected by all European member states, and now a standard building block in Europe used when creating digital solutions in public areas, to bring that also to the US. And here we have some discussions. And looking here at Jakarta and Jacob, our workshop we had together in the city of Paris, there could be an opportunity that Jakarta is interested also, at least to have a look at this solution, because they have started to create such what they also call a citizen relationship management system. And therefore they showed instance Lutece solution, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it, or maybe we'll also directly talk to the city of Paris to promote here an exchange between the two cities. But in total, I again, coming back to DC, I enjoyed the conference part, the interactions, the workshop.
You broke up a bit on us at the end there, but I don't know if you're still talking, but you got a little cut off.
Not only bringing open APIs, but also Wilfried, help me again.
You broke up a bit on us there. I think your line is drifting in and out of connectivity a little bit. Oh. I'll move on, Ulrich, because you're
okay.
not coming through very well. Hopefully you can hear us. Yeah, that sounded good. I think that was very positive. Anybody else just wants to add anything? John, did you want to add anything from the DC Expo and sort of data things that you picked up there?
No, just I was in the session on regional smart regions and sat in on some of the smart state discussions. So I think there is growing interest in looking at variable scales of smart city solutions. So what can one city do, and what can a metro area do, and then what can a whole megapolitan area do? And each of those scales, as you move up, becomes potentially more impactful, but also potentially more complicated because there's no jurisdiction that controls it all. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about at the meeting in Portland next month.
Great, looking forward to that. That'll be good. It is next month now, isn't it? We've started August, so it's just next month.
Right.
So what I wanted to do with the rest of the meeting here is to generate a discussion about. So we've been talking, and we've had several really good presentations. They're all up on the web. Anybody who's joining now, and there are several people that I've invited that haven't been attending before, Rick being one of them, but. There's also a couple of other folks who probably aren't joining today because they had a bit short notice, but will join us over time with the idea of one of the things we can start to do is to actually put some demonstration projects together. And I thought I'd talk about one that we have here in Portland that would start to move us down the right pathway. We'd like to do it the right way, and what I mean by the right way is to build it with open APIs. With components that are reusable, and solving the interoperability problems really in the same context as the ISC framework talks about, from point of not trying to sort of nail everything down, but have pivotal points of interoperability, places where we do need to have commonality, and then zones of concern where we can sort of develop chunks of code. They don't have to conform. We can have several different ways of handling identity or different ways of handling data, as long as they connect at these pivotal points of interoperability. And I think we've had quite a few discussions about this. Sarkul gave a good talk. I think people like Marty Burns are eager to step in and help us and move this framework idea to a real implementation. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with the various folks who've already given presentations, Fireware and Eclipse and people like Linux Foundation and others, all of whom have solutions to each of these problems, but currently they're not really interoperable. So we've been talking with a group in Portland about could we do something that would test some of these ideas that we're talking about, how we could get interoperability. And of course, one of the biggest challenges we have is around interoperability of various transportation modes. This could work in any of these domains, I think, but transportation seems to be an interesting one. And particularly in Portland, because we have a lot of options. We've got streetcar, we've got buses, we've got light rail, we've got bicycle rental, we've got several scooters to rent, we've got car share, we've got various different kinds of last mile shuttle. And also we have a number of different ways that we access those modes of transit, including the Hop Card, which is owned by TriMet, and you can get buses and streetcar and light rail from it. But currently it's not able to access bikes and scooters and car rentals. We've got a recognition that we need multimodal transit. There's even been some DOE funding to build something called Open Trip Planner, which could plan across these if it could find the services. And so the challenge is, could we build a platform that was able to securely and with data privacy allow you to use an application like the Open Trip Planner to plan a trip across these various modes, and book it and not have to spend a lot of time getting separate tickets and things. And so that's very interesting. Also, Portland Bureau of Transportation is very interested in gathering data from people's use of those modes, again, with privacy, in order to be able to start to incentivize behavior. And in particular, the behavior they want to incentivize is getting people to leave their cars at home and come in on transit. So as they can, as close as possible, eliminate single occupancy vehicle trips to downtown. And there's this area called the Central East Side of Portland, which is highlighted in the little map on this diagram, which has a mechanism right now of generating a certain amount of funding from a parking meter surcharge to try and tackle these problems. We're talking to that group. At the moment, all of that money goes to incentives, and so we're having to sort of bootstrap some things here. But this is the kind of thing we're trying to pull together. We'd certainly like help in doing it. We've got several pieces coming together already, but I think the long term of this would be to build a platform that might start in the transportation space, but potentially broaden out into a wider range of services. So that's sort of the framing of what we're trying to do. I would love it if there were other projects in other cities, you know, in Europe, Ulrich, or elsewhere in the US or whatever, that we're also doing this, and we could have, you know, collaborating teams, you know, addressing the issues of interoperability and portability between those. But I think if we do one right, then hopefully others will follow. But if we could be doing two together, I think we could, you know, we could be making sure that that the portability works as well. Get somebody else to use the Open Trip Planner. All the pieces that we're talking about here would need to, you know, touch at those pivotal points of interoperability. So we'd have to define what those are. I think some of them might be quite well defined already. For example, the NGSI API that Ulrich already talked about could be one of those points. We'd have to sort of agree to what they are, and then, you know, and then hopefully become influential in advancing them and you know, helping the next generation, and sort of build a community of groups in various cities. So as we can achieve that portability between cities and that interoperability within the cities. So questions about where we are and what we're trying to do, and the role that anybody on this call could play in that.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hi, this is Ricardo Vitorino from Ubiware, from Portugal, Europe. Hi, nice to talk to you. Yeah, sorry if I'm a bit tired, but I'm walking towards the train station to catch a train in my hometown. Anyway, just wanted to say that we have quite an experience with both smart city platforms, vertical solutions for mobility. We've actually been using Open Trip Planner for quite a while because it's a pretty cool solution for multimodal trip planning, even integrating with bike sharing systems and some other more flexible solutions than the public transit schedules. And we actually are under the Synchronicity project, an European funded project under the program Horizon 2020. We are working with several cities in Europe, including Porto in Portugal, but also with Manchester, Helsinki, Eindhoven, and among others. And they are actually doing the Open Trip Planner deployment and integrating it with Fireware. The thing that I wanted to say is, even if within this consortium and within this team, we have plenty of companies or organizations with expertise in platforms, interoperability, and so on, I think that we need to find as well the end user apps, the Uber, Lyfts, transit apps, city mappers, Move It, that sort of applications which have the user base, which are willing to easily integrate with a platform like the one we are defining here. Because I think that you could bring in a good platform with the state of the art of components, Open Trip Planner, do all those things, but without the user base, it's a bit of reinventing the wheel again. And I don't mean this in the hard way. I know it's a good approach, but I think we should also engage that sort of end user, because the rest we can provide and we can help. That's about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we are engaged with them. Some of them are amenable to working with us. Some of them are well established and like to have their own silos. I think that if we, I think one of the advantages of working with the communities that use these services and trying to create a community that is more than one city is that we can start to make it more and more attractive for those services to work with us. Let me give you an example. When the electric scooters come to Portland, all the electric scooters have to develop their own applications, and then they have to get citizens to sign up and load their application before they can ride the scooter. That is a high barrier to entry. Once somebody's brought a scooter in, of course, they cross the barrier and they like it because it stops other solutions coming in, and it's siloed, so it's very frustrating. I have 3 applications on my phone just to ride the scooters because there are 3 vendors. If we can get out there with a platform that allows scooter providers to provide their services that can be accessed through something like Open Trip Planner, and that the administration of signing up is simplified through the platform, then it becomes very attractive for companies to use that infrastructure for 2 reasons. One, it takes the barrier out to entry, but also it makes it easy for their solutions to be planned into trips going forward. And if you're not in that and somebody's using the Open Trip Planner and your service is not showing up there, then it's very then that's going to be bad for work in the future. So I completely agree that that we have an adoption problem here, Ricardo, and obviously you've run into it, we've run into it. I think there are ways to deal with it, and we need to do it as we go forward, but we can't really negotiate with those players if we don't have a viable solution, and if we don't have the communities behind us asking for it. Did that fit? Did I answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a two-way process. We cannot start in either end. We need to move forward with both. We need to find some availability from those players, because we know the silos issues and their concerns on being closed. But if those Lime providers, those electric scooters, are now, for instance, following a standard to make their data available to cities because cities demand that for them to operate there. I think that's a similar approach we could have here, but as you mentioned, we need the user base, so it's that's a steps process.
No, I totally agree with you. And that's why we're trying to do it in a practical situation rather than just go off and develop the platform and then try and promote it. We're actually we have an agreement with the group in the Central East Side to do a demonstration here, and with a great deal of eagerness to build on it as we go forward. And I'd love to get your experience in Porto to bear here. And if you've got a similar community that you're working with, I'd love to be sharing ideas. And similarly with other communities, I think that most of these problems have been solved in isolation, and we don't want to reinvent that. What we want to do is to get a community of us working together to get all these vendors working to have a more integrated solution, so as we don't have this ridiculous proliferation of user apps. So I'll keep going here, but I think that's a really good discussion. We have started. In fact, we started probably. I don't know if Isaac or John are on the phone. They're both with a company called Tosni locally, and we've worked with them. Open Commons has been working with them on this idea of the sort of data wallet, this ability to have a personal secure data store that we can incrementally provide access to components, and that's partly funded through a grant through the Department of Homeland Security here, with the idea of exploring data sharing with privacy. And so the idea of developing this wallet and plugging it into something like the Open Trip Planner is something we're already talking about. If other people have ways of doing this, we'd clearly be, very interested in that. The intent here will be that through this effort, we define one of those principal points of interoperability, basically how you would interact with your personal data, or how the services would interact with their own data, right? So this is, the intent here is that this not define the way you do it, but in doing this particular project, we define the API through which you would do these kinds of transactions, and we agree to that API. Whether people use TOSNI code or their own code or open code or whatever is yet to be determined, and should be different in different cities, as long as we have defined that point of our interoperability. There are a couple here that that I'm sort of still working on. I know we've had a number of conversations with Eclipse. They have some really interesting dynamic service infrastructure. We clearly want the ability, because various services come and go, so we want the ability to automatically discover those services and bring them in. So when you go into a new city, you ought to be able to discover the services that are there. In this city we have skip bikes and line bikes, but they may have bird bikes in San Francisco. When you're in San Francisco, bird bike should just show up. And if bird bike is no longer available in San Francisco, it just shouldn't show up. So there needs to be a way to discover and link to those services. So there needs to be another point of interoperability there where we can do that. I don't know if anybody from Eclipse is on the line today. I know it's the middle of the summer, so we don't have a large group. And then the context broker that Ulrich already talked about. I think that the ability when we look up those services to be able to put them in a context. Am I disabled? Therefore, don't show me scooters. Is sort of part of that decision process. I think I'm sure you could do a better job here, Ulrich, of describing the use of the context broker. But I think that could also be through the NGSI API, a pivotal point of interoperability. So that's another thing we need to sort of nail down. I don't think we have to do all of this in the beginning, and I think maybe folks in Porto are establishing some of these on their projects, and we should just use them here. And vice versa, we may be making some new definitions around the APIs for the data wallet that Porto can just use from us. But I think the objective of this group is to look at the various options we have for those interfaces and pick the best, or merge multiple ones to get the best, but to agree to a set of those points of interoperability that are common, so that when there's a different way of handling security, that can be developed. It might have added features that are better, but it always plugs in. So you could swap it out in Porto, you could swap it out in Portland, or you could swap it out in Paris. So I think those are and the only other two that I have here, we need to do something with identity. We've had Intel and IOTA present here, and there are plenty of others talking about various forms of identity. Both Intel and IOTA talked about the sort of the high level identity, probably using something like blockchain. I think for most transactions, we need a much lighter weight infrastructure. I think Mick Bowman from Intel talked a lot about that, and I think we need to define what that is and how you interface to it, and maybe there needs to be something in the API that tells you the level of security in that particular identity, in the same way as we all know, a passport is much more secure as an identity than a credit card, and they're sort of hierarchical. We need to define that in the API for how to access it. And then we need some form of language to define transactions between two entities, something like a contract language. I know there are plenty of them out there being developed in the blockchain world. Doesn't have to be a blockchain infrastructure, but some mechanism by which we can decide I will rent this scooter under the following conditions, and that's done somewhat automatically with information coming to the user about what he's signing up for, right? Is he agreeing to the fact that if he crashes the scooter into a wall, he has to pay for it, right? Those kinds of terms need to be somewhat automated if we're going to make this all work. So this is very, very rough, and it was intentionally rough. Because what I want is to start to engage across the various projects in this group and other groups, folks who aren't here, but I know are working on similar things, and start to try and align around these pivotal points of interoperability. Again, I'm not trying to standardize the code. It would be nice if for every one of those places where we have a point of interoperability, we have an open version of implementable code that can sort of prove out and test that interface. But I don't think that's absolutely necessary. If there are proprietary versions of these with open APIs, that may get us going and move us in the right direction. But the idea is that we move from a situation in which there is a proliferation of siloed services around a city, and that they're not portable, to a situation in which those cities are now integratable through things like the Open Trip Planner, and that we can use those services in Portland or Porto or Paris or London or wherever, so as we can create markets for the services that our companies deliver and ship them worldwide without having to do custom solutions everywhere. So that was quite a mouthful. Comments?
Well, I really like this suggestion from Ricardo about the European pilots, especially Helsinki and Eindhoven. I think the Netherlands and Helsinki have very sophisticated integrated transit choices. One of the things, Wilf, around the integration with his suggestion to integrate with Uber, and Uber is also bikes and scooters now. I believe that Tim McHugh from TriNet, because he was one of the early people, has some kind of exclusive integrations with Uber in particular that we might want to track down. Uber's kind of closed, but he got in early. So he might have some special relationships with Google and Uber that we could attempt to pry more available.
Yeah, no, I agree with Ricardo that is one of the challenges we have and how we approach them. My tendency is to think that the people trying to get into the market are probably the easier ones to work with than the people who are fully established. As you point out, Stan, the folks like Uber use barriers to, as a competitive advantage over their competitors out there, and they're not highly motivated as we start up to help reduce those barriers. So I agree with you. We should talk to Tim and see if we have an in to Uber. But I would think that Uber is probably going to be one of the later ones in, because they benefit from the siloing, and their large market share already. So that's a hard one to crack. A lot of the others, the scooter providers, and others, I think are probably the first ones in. I think once we have momentum, once we have, once there is a significant group of users on the open platform that are, doing things like planning their trips through the Open Trip Planner, I think it starts to become very uncomfortable, even for somebody like an Uber or a Lyft, to stay outside that community and not integrate. But I think they're going to be the last because, they've got established markets already. They don't have a barrier to entry anymore. They have a barrier to competition, and they're not going to give it up that easily. Does that make sense? But I'd love to work with Tim on that too. I think we've got some good support here. I don't think this is an easy path, Ricardo. I think you're absolutely right. But I do think that the biggest barrier right now is that there's not an alternative to the siloing. And if we could come up with that, I think there are enough players out there who would step on board, that we would start to gradually move. And I think the more, if we can get Porto and Helsinki and Eindhoven and Portland and Paris and London on board, going down this road and asking for these and making their own, public services like the underground and the light rail and the streetcar available through this platform, and they don't have a benefit to maintaining the barrier, then I think things do start to tip. But I think at the moment we don't have an alternative to siloing, and that's what we need.
One other suggestion, I didn't mean to slow it down by the Uber point, but China has a totally different system and actually more rideshare adoption than 2/3 of the total rideshare in the world is in China. So if we get the Didi version of the integration of all those user apps with the MTR, which is the same as London's, that would be we might be able to get the integration ideas from some of the China, like Hong Kong or Singapore, that have more of the gateway capability there, right, and share a lot with London.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I don't mean to limit this just to transit. I think, John, even when we were talking about the corridor at PSU, right, the ability to integrate between, parking sensors and, Hello Lamppost and other stuff, those, I think that also is a way that we could do this. The objective here is all city services, whether they be, shared office or shared vehicles or access to transit, ought to have an ability to be discovered as services in a city. So the app that I have is able to find those and present them to me in a logical way.
No, I think that putting together a disparate set of applications that have no history with each other as a testing ground for a generic system like you're describing would be good. And we are trying to bring together maybe between 6 and 10 different applications, all located in the same 2-block area, partly for public education, but it could provide a nice platform to test out a number of the things that have been discussed in this series.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think I saw Richard Beckwith on, but I don't think I saw Richard. I don't think I saw Mick Bowman on, but I don't know if you've spent much time on the issues of sort of identity and the sort of contract language stuff, but I'm kind of looking for somebody who'll step up. I think working with Fireware and Atos, we can go tackle the issues around context broker. I think we work with Tosny and others, around the data wallet. And this is not intended to be exclusive. I'm just looking for sort of a place to start the momentum in each of these areas and start to figure out how to nail down, what it is we need in order to be interoperable and then sort of get agreement around that. But I don't have anybody sort of leading the contracting language side, and we could probably just adopt something like Solidarity from Ethereum if we wanted as a start point. But it would be good to be sort of going into more depth here. So I'm sort of fishing a little in the group here as to, if anybody's interested in stepping up on any of the ones that I've got a little more detail on, or any of the ones that I have no detail on, like this contract language one or the identity one. That would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, that's much more Mick than it is me. I will say though that I know that Mick is very interested in the smart contract things, in particular, alternatives to blockchain that still retain the distributed ledger notions, and federated identity is crucial for so much of the stuff that's being done. So I'm going to say that I think that sounds like Mick.
Yeah, I will. I mean, part of the reason for sort of pushing you on it, you did that really interesting work with the the logistics on the hops delivery system has the same, the same things. You want to be able to establish the, the identity of the providers, and then track the products from beginning to end. And no doubt there are going to be things like digital contracts with the carriers and other folks. So you sort of touched on a lot of this, and so I'll see if I can pin down Mick again. I know a lot of people are out because it's the middle of the summer, and we'll probably start to get people coming back in next month. But
I'm going to say one thing that's nice is that it's very easy to park at Intel these days.
Because it's summer. Yes, probably a lot easier on 26 as well.
Yep.
So any other suggestions or comments here? I'm hoping this is a good framing. As I say, there are a lot of people that are not available today, and I will touch base with them and see if I can start to flesh this out. But and I know the TOSNI folks are up for this and in on it. I will follow up with Eclipse and Intel and Ulrich. This all sounds pretty kosher to you from the conversations we've been having. You're comfortable this is a good way to tackle the framing of this, and a way to sort of bring Atos in and start to get an implementation here in the US?
Yes, that's okay for me, and I'll also answer by chat because my connection is really weak.
Okay, good. No, you're clear now. I lost you a little bit earlier, but you're clear now. Cool. I think this is really good. If anybody has anything else they want to pick up, but feel free both to look at this. I did record most of this, so I can put that up there. You can point other people at it if you think they would be interested. But I'm openly soliciting people to come and engage on any of the 5 slides that I've got here. And if I've missed anything out, which I am absolutely certain I have, as to important points of interoperability that we need to start to define, let's do that. And I think once we get those groups rolling, then we can pull them together, and they can start to be more methodical about identifying what we've missed out. Right? I just want to get a project going, so as we're not doing the definition of these APIs in abstract. I think we've got plenty of APIs. It's what's the best out there today that we can do, and how do we need to start to become engaged with those APIs to move them forward, so as they become not just an IoT API but a smart city API. Not just an identity, but something that's truly applicable in the smart city environment. And I suspect that there's plenty out there to get going with now, and then we engage with those once we've selected which way we want to go, and tweak them and become active in those communities to move them forward.
Wilf, this is John. I just want to go back to the first topic when you and Jacob were talking about the work in Baltimore at the interface of cities and universities for data management. And I'd just like to make sure that stays part of this discussion, because I think it's got a lot of potential, and I haven't heard it talked about much outside of this group.
Yeah, there is an interesting piece there, and maybe Ulrich's had some experience here, or Ricardo. The topic that John is talking about is that there's a lot of data that the cities have been collecting over a fairly long period of time, but it's very poorly curated, or at least our experience with the cities we've been engaging with is that it's very hard for researchers to find that data and do research. So if you're looking to do a new route plan in the city of Portland, you talk to folks who collected data. There's quite a lot of it out there. It should be free and open, but when it is free and open, it's hard to find. If somebody's charging a lot of money for it, like a Google or a Verizon, they've done a good job of curating it. But there's a lot of data out there that just seems to be hard to get at, hard to understand. And so we, Jacob, you please feel free to chip in here, started working with Johns Hopkins University around their library, curating some of the Baltimore data. And then he shared that idea with us, and we've started to work through John. We've started to work with Portland State University to see if they'd be willing to curate it. There is a link back to what we were just discussing, which I hadn't really thought of before, John, which is that a lot of that data could be contextual information that we could use in the city platform itself. And if it was live and available, right? I mean, a lot of this data is, in fact, in its raw form, is in fact live, right? So we know that they're collecting data about the inductive coils in the road for traffic and people getting on and off, various, the streetcar and the light rail and the buses. And that data historically is very useful for route planning. But as live data, it's extremely valuable too. If we could know when a bus was full, then we could we could give people a heads up that the next bus that's coming into the next stop is over capacity already, and that they shouldn't be waiting for that bus. They should be waiting for the next one or finding another route. So those, if we get the APIs right for accessing the data, we need to do two things. One, we need to standardize the way that people access it, whether they're accessing it in real time or as historical for planning purposes. And we need to, to figure out how to expose not just the data itself, but all the metadata that goes with it. So as from a curation point of view, it's something that people can actually use. And so I like the idea, John. Let's maintain it, but let's link it as well. How are people going to interact with this data should be part of the curation discussion. Can it be done in a way that is standardized through some set of APIs that could be very analogous to the principal points of interoperability? Does that make sense? Is that kind of where you've gone?
Yeah. Yes.
Cool. That's great. Jacob, does that make sense to you too?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other topics while we're on? As say, I'm sorry we didn't have a larger group here. I would have liked to have Eclipse on, sort of talking about their stuff. But I think this was very useful to sort of lay it out. If you think of questions as over the next week or so and want to send email, I can build it into the slides here. This is very much a straw man. I have no and it was particularly around Portland. So Ricardo, if you've got something similar to this that you're doing in Porto, I'd love to have you bring it to another meeting and talk about what you're doing and see how it aligns and see if we've got, the same kind of, zoning of this and touching at the same sort of points of interoperability. Is there something that you could, like this, that you could bring as a project to talk about? We could use it as a way to start to think about how the things that you did in Porto could be used in Portland and so on.
Yeah, I think that, sorry about the noise. I think that makes total sense to bring in what we usually call success stories from what we are doing, what we've learned that didn't go as well, and see what on the other side what's up in Portland and what are the current pain points, what are the needs that the city wants to solve, and see how we can replicate what we are doing in Europe there. So yeah, it makes total sense. I can try to wrap up that content. I won't say for next week's call, but soon enough. But I will try to bring it up for show and tell, and then we can see what's needed on the other side and see how they match. So it makes total sense. Thank you, Wilfred.
That'd be great. And I don't know, Yasunori or Hiroki, if you have something similar in Japan that you would like to sort of share that we could learn from on that side as well.
This is Yasunori speaking, and probably this expectation or need for this kind of an open trip planner would not exactly something immediately needed in Japan, because we have a different type of pains related to transport But actually, I had some thought that turned out to be very interesting to me to ask myself, which is thinking about the supercluster structure. About this series of conversation has a strong relevance with the transport supercluster, whereas we have another data cluster stuff, right? And we've been talking about this series of contract making and opting in and services integration from the point of view of transportation, which tends to push everything to be embedded to the series of services related to transport, including the planning. Whereas on the city management tend to also think of the possibility of bringing in all the data that are opted in. For instance, probably Portland, you guys talked about something like forming a Portland data lake. And this situation is sort of similar in Japan, I think. And some government is starting to encourage some personal data store or handled by what we call information bank. So I'm now starting to get more and more interested in how these two approaches, where the basic architecture of handling, how we handle this contract making and privacy handling, both done in the right fashion, either coming from the embedded fashion to some specific or realistic series of services, or to something more generic data lake type of approach. And that sounds like something interesting to me. Of course, talking about APIs and stuff, it's always nice to have something more open and interoperable. But then we might be starting to ask ourselves how we're going to handle these two possibilities, looking at some future possibility of harnessing more opportunities of making higher values made out of the data available.
That sounds great. It sounds like that we should be pulling you into the conversation that John and Jacob having with the university curation. If you've got the same sort of issues associated with data that the data lake does here, I think that would be really interesting. So if you're interested, let's make sure you get linked into that discussion, because I think there's some real opportunity there to moving that forward.
Yeah, right, thanks.
Excellent. Any other questions? Well, thanks everybody. Sorry for those people who had to be on at very horrible times of day and night, but I thought it was a really good discussion. Thank you. And we'll get Ricardo lined up to do that. I think it'll be really interesting to get another example of sort of similar challenges, and we'll line up a good discussion. John, let's line something up around where we're going with the data curation, and make that part of this discussion.
Do you have a next date?
I think it's actually 2 weeks from now. I believe. Let's see. I'm showing everybody my calendar. I'm aware of that. I do have something on the calendar next week, but I think I don't think there's a need for it unless somebody has a topic they want to bring up. So let's plan on the next one being out on the 15th, if that's okay.
I'm sorry, Wilfred. I'm sorry. This is Hiroaki. Can I speak something?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my problem, so I cannot say something. Anyway, so I'm very interested in this kind of data infrastructure of smart city. We Saitama City also established our own. It's a kind of probably, but our own information bank system. Also health information and power touching history. This kind of data is now we manage in our information bank, and also we sell this information bank data to the local companies, and we are making some businesses by using this data. We're just starting this kind of system. So anyway, so we want to exchange this kind of knowledge and also the know-how to use and manage this kind of database system. And also what kind of data services can we provide in the smart city as a smart city service. Anyway, so we want to make some exchanges kind of knowledge. So we're very interested in this kind of data infrastructure. Yeah.
Would you be able to do a presentation on?
Yes.
Data?
Yeah.
Maybe we should do that next Thursday.
Okay. So in the GCTC, I also joined the data supercluster panel, we'll make some presentation, or it's a 5-minute presentation, so that we can share the slides and also we can make some presentation. Yes.
That would be great. Let's
thank you very much.
That.
Yeah.
So I'll keep the time slot next week, folks.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
And if you could do that, that would be great.
Okay.
Hiroki. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sounds good. Thanks everybody. This was a good session.
Bye-bye.
Have a great week.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Cheers.